Hey, this is Lee Balkman. I just wanted to talk about something that just happened because this happens all the time. And I know why it happens, and I know why this doesn't help. So, what happened is I got some communication from somebody who was looking to have a coach, and they were asking me if I could do some coaching. Here's what they wanted in their coaching: they wanted to learn communication skills. And so, once again, I'm faced with this dilemma because if I just decided to teach communication skills, I could do that all day long, right? And lots of people would take that course, and very few people would transform or change their marriage in any way because of that information. How do I know that? Well, first of all, personal experience and my work as a therapist. And second, because research shows this over and over. And yet, this is why people think that. If you go Google, and I did it, what's the best way that you can save a broken marriage, or how do you save a broken marriage? Right there. It says it. Communication. Communication. What it's saying is if you get the communication first, then everything else will fall in place. Let me be clear. That is not the case. So why does this happen? Why is this a repeated thing? Because now I have been doing this for over 3 decades. And I remember it being taught to me. And I remember how many people would come to my office saying, you need to teach us communication skills. That's our problem. We can't communicate. And so we would go through this process. This was early in my days of training. This is one of the first places that I went, we've got a therapy problem. We've got an issue with marital therapy. And that's when I backed up and asked the question, how effective is marriage therapy? And this is one of the reasons why it is not particularly helpful. You look at the research and it will back me up. And the research wasn't necessarily even out back then. I was just going, this isn't working. So here is what it says. The number one rule for saving a marriage or any relationship focuses on communication first. That is useless. Let me tell you why. Well, first of all, let me tell you how we got to this problem. We teach communication skills to people who are training to be therapists so that they are good therapists, so they do a good job of communicating and receiving information. And that really is the whole process of communication. How can I relay experience back and forth between me and other parties? And how can I take in that information? How can I share that information? And how can we do it effectively? You use communication skills every single day of your life. And so when we're teaching that to therapists, we're helping to refine and make it better. So we have a listener talker kind of model, right? The talker, listener, back and forth. So if you come to my office as an individual getting therapy, you're going to want to talk and I'm going to want to listen. You're not going to want me to be spending all my time. Imagine you come to a therapist office and they launch into how their day is going and how their week is going, and they're just, sharing that. Let me just pause here and say, if you go to a therapist and that's what they do, you need to find another therapist. They're there to listen and help you process that information, right? And so the talker-listener model, that's great for individual therapy. But we then took that model and went, okay, let's use that for people who are coming to therapy as a couple. And that's where the breakdown happens. So one of the things, John Gottman, a great researcher in this field, says that what we're teaching couples when we're doing those communication skills are emotional gymnastics. I'm not a gymnast. If I were to try that, it would be a joke to watch how awkward it would look for me. I'm trying to contort my body in ways that's just not trained to do. And that's what happens with these communication skills. So let's just kind of take an example of one that is often taught to couples. It's the I statements, right? An I statement says something like this. I feel, fill in the blank, some emotion, when you do, fill in it with some action you do. And then later on, that was how we taught it originally. And it was just a way of kind of, instead of going, you're a jerk for the way you're talking, we transformed it to, this is how you make me feel. Right, which is a problem in itself. But let's just go with that. It's, I feel this when you do this. Along the way, we learned to add on the next piece. What I would like you to do is this. Now, there is nothing wrong with that formula, but it's certainly not natural for couples to do. And there's another layer to that. So first of all, we would teach couples to do that, and we would walk them through it, and we would coach them through that process. And pretty soon they were saying, I feel hurt when you do this, and what I would like you to do is this. And that would last for 3 or 4 exchanges before the person hearing it would hear them saying, you're a jerk. They would short circuit it right back to what was the non-I statement kind of meaning behind it. And there's a reason for that I want to talk about in just a minute, but I just want to follow this out for a little bit. So we teach these communication skills. And the idea is if people are better at communicating, they'll get along better. That's not what happens. So the research shows that when we do this communication skills stuff, we don't really get any long-term impact in marriages. You've heard me use these statistics. About 50% of couples who go to therapy end still in distress and end up divorced. 50%. About the same as in the general population, right? So it's no more effective. Second thing is only 10 to 15% report that there's any improvement, like long-term improvement. And 10 to 15%, depending on which study it's looking at, 1 out of 10 says that something got a little bit better for them. 15 out of 100 couples who go to therapy would say that it made some difference in their life. Those are not great statistics for something that is generally considered to be the first order if your marriage is in trouble. And I think it's because we have fallen back on this idea, because whatever had happened in the media, suddenly couples were coming in going, teach me communication skills. Teach us communication skills. That will solve our problem. It doesn't. So let me just kind of talk about this. I get this on a regular basis, and I just want to say, if you hear this and then you come to me and you say, okay, now teach me communication skills, I'm going to ask you, have you done the other pieces of this process that I want to talk through before that? Because we got to get to that. Communication is simply a way of relaying information between two people, right? It's a conduit of information. That's all it is. It's a neutral conduit of information. So let's say that you have been working on a super old computer and you type it in and it takes forever for it to churn and churn and churn. And so you upgrade it, right? You give it better ways of transferring that information internally. It gets faster, whether it's storing it to the hard drive or processing it through the RAM or whatever it needs to do to run it through. The programs run faster, everything gets more effective. The communication between everything is better. But if you're putting in crappy data, you are going to get crappy data out. As my data processing instructor told me way back in 1984-ish, garbage in, garbage out. You can make garbage move faster, but it's still garbage in and garbage out. Do you see what I'm saying here? It's the conduit that we're trying to improve, not what's traveling through the conduit. So if you build a house, you put conduits to bring in stuff and take out stuff. You bring in clean water, you take out dirty water, right? Okay, that's great. And you can make bigger pipes so it does it faster and brings in more water and whatever. Great. But you got to make sure you're hooking it up right. Let's say you reverse it and all you're doing is getting the dirty water coming in, and there's no way you can clean that up. That's what happens in relationships that are hurting. We've already poisoned the conduit. And so we can't simply say, let's give you a bigger pipe to send this in and out. Let's make it a better conduit, because what you're communicating is the real issue. That's our foundational problem. That's why teaching communication does not help couples do better in marriage. Never has, never will. Now, if a couple is doing pretty well, yes, a couple can learn better communication skills because they're already doing a good job of transferring good stuff to each other. So they could do it more effectively. Absolutely. But a couple who is distressed does not gain from using communication skills, and yet that is the default setting for therapy many times. Whether you even call it that or not, that's often what we're doing. Let's teach you to do the I statements, right? And all that's doing is trying to improve the conduit without looking at why it's happening. So, communication. That's a C word. Let's stick with that. I tend to like C's. That's how I've talked about my process of the 3 C's of connect, change yourself, create a new path. That's the whole thing of my Save the Marriage system. And I've used some other ways of using those C's. And I want to just kind of pull some of that together to understand how communication fits into the process. And what you're going to notice, it's at the bottom of the pile. Don't hear me say communication doesn't matter. Hear me say communication is not the number, I just threw it on the floor, I can't reach for it, but it's not the number one issue. It just is not the number one issue. We've got to get there in a different way. So let's talk about it. As I got a little coffee, let's talk about the other C's along the way. One of the first C's that I'm going to put in there is calm. Because part of what happens in distressed relationships is they communicate when they're not calm, when they're upset. That's when the communication happens. And so crap is what they're communicating. Because they're not calm, they're upset. And more than that, when they get upset in the midst of a conversation, they don't stop long enough to calm down, return to a normal state, and continue the process. So what they do is they ramp it up. Now, just for a moment, while I grab a cup of coffee, I want you to think about the many times that you've continued to have a conversation when you're not calm. Think about that just for a minute. Did you think of one? Let me think of how often people say this phrase, don't go to bed angry. Sometimes you need to go to bed angry and calm down long enough that you can have a rational conversation instead of continuing through the angry conversation. Having an angry conversation rarely gets you there. So calm, meaning that you try to find a place where you can be calm as you're in the midst of exchanges. More than that, when you're not calm, you decide you're going to set it aside for a little bit, long enough to find your calm. What happens when you're not calm? Fight, flight. Well, fight, flight, freeze, flail, if we put it all together, but you don't have productive communication. You don't have productive conversations. You don't have productive connection because it's going through that reactive, that defensive place. And remember, if you're distressed, you're disconnected, right? You're not acting on each other's teams. And so that distress means that any lack of calm leads to more distress. So what do you think the next C is? I want you to think back on childhood and what got you to move forward to discover new things. It's curiosity. And so curiosity is a great lead-in to what we were trying to get to when we're in a relationship, which is empathy. When I'm talking with distressed couples, one of the things that is often missing is a sense of empathy for each other. What is empathy? Feeling what the other person is feeling and feeling some emotional connection to that. Feeling for them. Not feeling bad for them, but feeling for them. So empathy is going, wow, that must be really tough to be at that place. And how can I move in and help with that? How can I be a part of that? Empathy is to feel with them, to join with them. Many times when couples are distressed, that is not where they are. They are about what's going on with me. And there is a road back, and that is curiosity. Let me ask you a question. I want you to think about this while I grab another sip of coffee. When is the last time you were curious about what was going on with your spouse? Not blaming your spouse, not putting a label on what they were doing, but just asking that question. I wonder what's going on with them. Think of that last time. How long ago was it? How long ago? I bet it's been a while. If you're in a distress situation, curiosity is something we block out because then you would have to be thinking from the other person's perspective. But here's the cool thing. We can always decide to be curious. I consider it to be, and this was a question that was asked to me when I was doing some graduate level teaching on becoming a therapist and becoming a family therapist. And someone in the class said, "So what do you think it is that's the number one attribute of a good therapist?" And I said, "Well, what do you think?" And some people were like, "Oh, being a good listener." Other people were like, really being empathetic. Other people were, having compassion. And I went, "No, that's not what I would put. I would put curiosity." And they were a little surprised, but the actual fact is that curiosity is the path to those things that they were naming. Curiosity leads us to empathy. Curiosity leads us to compassion. Curiosity leads us to be a good listener because you're curious to know what's behind there and you can nurture your own curiosity. So curiosity is number 2, which leads us to number 3, C, care. You've got to decide to care. Now, you can care about the fact that you want your marriage to last. You can care about the fact that you are concerned for your spouse's well-being. You can care for the fact that this impacts a lot of people when there is a distress in a relationship, but you got to care. You got to find a place of caring. And I would suggest a piece of that is caring for what's going on in the relationship and with your spouse. Those 2 pieces. Caring about that. And because if you don't care, and this is one of those places where I talk about disconnection. Along the path of disconnection, you stop caring about that. You're right. You detach from that. And some people even stop caring about the effect it would have to end a marriage, but they certainly stop caring about what's going on with their spouse. And this is a place where you re-engage that. Caring again. And you can choose to do that. If you're curious, curiosity leads to care. So if you are in the midst of creating that care, by the way, create is another C word, so we'll throw that in there too. We're creating something new here, right? That's the overarching thing of all this. Why are we doing this? To create something new. So we're creating something new by being calm, by using curiosity to find our way to care, which leads us to a willingness to connect. Connection is something I've talked about in another video. You can watch that video to understand the 3 arenas or 3 zones of connection that we're going to want to focus on. But when you are finally at the place of caring again, you're willing to connect. You care about connecting. And you do it with some calm, which helps to do that. Because once you've worked on the connection, you've got to do something else that I see lacking all of the time. Consistency. If you've gotten into a pattern with your spouse where you keep on churning through the same problems, the same situation over and over, what you don't have is consistency of change in a good direction. You may have consistency of the broken ways, right? You get into a consistent broken phrase and a consistent broken operation, but can you move to a consistently positive, connected, calm, caring place? Consistency is a huge issue. What I often hear from people is, we've been down this road so many times. I don't trust that we're going to be able to do it this time. Why should I try again? Because we'll just get to the same path. And every time you're inconsistent, right? Every time you break the consistency, you make it harder to believe it the next time, or for your spouse to believe it the next time. And so part of the task here is to find a consistent way of staying in that space, which leads us finally to communication. Yes, communication has a role. And people say, so you don't think that people should be better at communication? Absolutely, I think people should be better at communication. We just don't lead with that. If you lead with that, you're never going to get there, because all you're doing is learning how to relay information. As I've said to many couples, if all you want is communication skills, all I'm doing is teaching you to fight more effectively. Not how to not fight, how to join together, but be effective in your attacks and be effective in how you kind of trip people up, because that's the nature of communication skills. We use them as techniques. The techniques have to be supporting something good, otherwise they're used for bad. We see that all of the time when people are using communication skills for manipulation. I mean, let's face it, the people who have mastered this the most are marketers and politicians, and they are not using it to create a relationship that helps you. They're using it to create a relationship that helps them. So if they're better communicators, all they're doing is getting their crap across in better ways, more convincingly, more effectively, but not in a way that's really about care or curiosity or connection or empathy or anything else that we've talked about. Communication is a skill you need. You just don't lead with that. Now, if you need help with the other pieces of that, and including communication, I'd love to talk about it with you. I've got a couple of resources. One is free, it's online. You can find me at The Connection Compass. Go to theconnectioncompass.online and just subscribe. It's a Substack, easy way to subscribe there. And I put out articles. If you really like it, there are other resources that are available to you. And if you need serious help with how to move forward, find me at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. And this is Lee Balcom wishing you the best as you work to save and improve your marriage, not just use communication, but save and improve your marriage. I'll see you next time.